Hello, everybody, and welcome back to A Soon Revoter's Guide. I'm your host, Matt Tengtrakool, and today we have the man, the myth, the legend, DeRay Mckesson on our show today. You know him as one of America's most influential political activists and the host of Pod Save the People. DeRay, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for speaking with me today.
It's so good to be here.
Thank you. Such an inspiration. And as you know, our podcast is focused on young voters who will be future policymakers and activists. So I think I'm going to name the episode Pod Save the Future in honor of that. I think it's fitting.
Yes.
Of course. And I'm super excited to have you on. And your work as an activist is, again, really inspiring for young people like myself. And I know that you were one of the early key supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement, a cause that has really come a long way to today. And reflecting on where we are today, how much progress do you think has been made with the movement, and how far away are we still to achieving its greater goals?
I think that undoubtedly we have changed the conversation about race and justice and the police in the country, and that has been really powerful. I think about being in the street in 2014. I was one of the original protesters in the street. When we think about the movement's beginning and what it meant that so many people, not a part of a chapter, not a part of a group with no membership cards, people came out because they understood that it was the right thing to do. That was really powerful, and that changed the country in so many ways. Now, the sobering news is that the police have killed consistently since we have data. So there's no national data before 2013, but from 2013 to today, the police are sort of on a consistent trend line, like not really any dips. Even this year, the police did not slow down because of quarantine, COVID, any of that stuff. So that is hard. So when I think about the win is that the police kill less people and we transition away from policing as the key to public safety. We have not gotten there yet. I get nervous when people are a little too celebratory in this moment. I think that there are some wins we've gotten along the way, like some laws, some policies. We should actually celebrate those things, but acknowledge that like until we do some big systemic stuff, we just won't get the wins in terms of the numbers. The police are literally just killing at the same rate.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a lot of this progress we've seen is through the support and consensus of social media. We've seen like players wearing Black Lives Matter uniforms or celebrities condemning police violence. But how do you think we can convert this change in sentiment into actionable change in policy going forward?
Yeah, so there are 18,000 police departments across the country, and almost all the change that you'll want will be local. So it's about taking whatever you know to be true and you hear about the national landscape and making sure that we apply it locally. Like that's really the thing. The federal government has very little power over police departments in the United States. There are a couple big police departments at the national level that right? ICE, Border Patrol, the DEA, right? ATF, the Homeland Security crew. But they are a small fraction of the police departments in the United States, and local is where it matters. So, we did a campaign called "A Can't Wait" around use of force policies. Police union contracts are a big deal. Citizen oversight, budgets, like all of that will happen at like the town and the county and the state level. So that's where you should be fighting. Is that it is interesting and important to have the conversation online and to sort of fight about these things, but until you put the rubber to the road, until you put a stake in the ground and say, you know what, I'm going to attend the meeting so I can learn about the budget. I'm going to read the policy so I know sort of what it says. I'm going to figure out how can officers be disciplined and why they aren't. Like that's actually where the rub is.
Mhm. Yeah, and um, going back to the idea of harnessing social media and activism, I think there are some benefits in there, especially it's my generation's strength in being able to share our beliefs online, whether it's through spreading a hashtag like hashtag stay woke or spreading body cam video of police officers to keep their policing interactions in check. What is your take on the use of technology and social media in forging activism?
Yeah, so I think the technology, especially the platforms like Twitter, accelerate the pace of impact, right? That all of a sudden a video can go from nowhere to everywhere. All of a sudden we can not know each other in real life, and all we meet on the internet and we come to a place and we organize. So like that is beautiful. I'm always mindful though that the single biggest say that the internet does is that it reframes the conversation in terms of awareness, right? You see a video that you didn't even know existed. You understand a conversation that you weren't a part of before. I think that too often people confuse awareness with a change in outcomes. Like they think that, when we look at the data, it's sort of wild, right? Is that for all of the work that's happened, the police have just been on a rampage, like literally no change. But that's hard for a lot of people to understand because they're like, but we've been talking about it and it's been happening. And da-da-da. Like they just assume that the awareness like must mean that something changed. And the only example that I can talk about that makes sense, like the only way to translate this is like, imagine being in a school where like everybody loved the classroom, but nobody learned, Like
Yeah.
you've been in that class where like everybody, people love going to it, love the teacher, and like literally nobody learned a single thing. Like it was like a learning free zone, right?
Yeah.
Is that we just have to be mindful not to get trapped in a place where like people think that the big win is the conversation change. Cause like the reason why we got in the street was like to make sure that people's lives were okay, right? Like that's like the thing that called everybody to the street. It wasn't so we could have like a new cool conversation.
Mhm. I totally agree. And I know one big win you've had though is with your campaign zero. It's one of the biggest initiatives in police reform and enforcing other police reform aspects like body cameras. And can you briefly explain Campaign Zero's mission and more importantly, how young people can get involved and support this campaign?
Yeah, so we call it Campaign Zero because we're like, we can live in a world where the police don't kill anybody. Like, we believe that, right? Like, that is our framing. We think that that is real. We think that's possible. And what's important about that is that we know that there are structures and systems and laws that protect the police that make it impossible right now to get the things that we want. And we're trying to peel those back. So we launch projects or campaigns. We launch many campaigns that are about these discrete things. So 8 Can't Wait was changing use of force policies. Single biggest change in use of force policies in American history, reducing the power of the police. We just launched this campaign around police union contracts. We have the only database of police union contracts in the United States. We're about to do some other stuff around decarceration and loss, but it's always with this three-part story, right? There's a really big problem. The problem's close to you, and you can do something about it. So we're always taking this data. We're always sort of taking something that we know, and then helping people figure out where it applies to them locally, and then encouraging them to take action.
Okay, great. And with all this reallocation, redesigning of the policing system, especially that Campaign Zero backs, we've heard this phrase, which is defund the police. I think that the term defund itself is divisive to many people. And now that we're seeing it more and more in the rhetoric from both sides of the political party, trying to push their ideologies and agendas behind this issue, can you explain what this phrase, defunding the police, means to you and help us better understand what needs to change?
Yeah, so part of what we have to acknowledge, right, as organizers, is that we can't be so arrogant to believe that the only way to enter the space is the way that we enter the space. So there's some people who can enter from a frame of defund as like the frame they think about it. There are other people for whom that's not the right frame for them, and that's not any fault of their own, right? So, when I talk about it with some people, I talk about moving the money. What does it mean to move the money away from policing into other things? I also remind people that no matter what the phrase is that you already agree with the idea. The core idea is this notion that experts should do what experts do. Who should respond to somebody dealing with a mental health crisis? Probably an expert, right?
Yeah.
Who should respond to homelessness? Probably an expert in social work.
Mhm.
Who should respond to someone who has suicidal ideation? Somebody equipped to do that as a specialist, right? Not somebody with a gun.
Mhm.
So what we have built up is a system where a person with a gun responds to everything. And we just see that having dire consequences. You think about the man that was just killed in LA the other day for a biking violation. It's like, do you really need a gun to respond to what wasn't even a violation? But even if it was to a bike incident, no, you don't.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, this issue is front and center in politics right now, going into the November elections. And one thing that we see consistently is that while the younger population of voters continues to grow. They consistently have the lowest voter turnout rates. How do you think that we can get young voters, especially those of color, out to vote this year?
Yeah, I think that we have to. So first, we got to be honest that some of these Republican talking points are hitting, right? That like they are sticking. I tweeted about this, but I was in DC, and I was in a CVS, and these two black women who were cashiers were having this whole conversation about Kamala not being black, and it was literally like the talking points from the right to like tear her down. And we have to be honest that their talking points are seeping into communities that we care about, like our communities and communities we care about, and we got to push back on that because like that disinformation and misinformation will literally kill us because this administration is not interested in anything that'll help people of color or poor people. The other thing to remember is I worry that when people talk to younger people, I think I'm young, but when people talk to younger people, it's this idea that if you vote, you care. If you don't vote, you don't care about the country. If you understood your power, you'd vote. Like it's that narrative. And like you just won't shame, even if those things were true, right? Which they're not. You won't shame people into voting. Like that's just not, that is a bad strategy.
Yeah.
The way that I've always thought we should talk about it is this idea that we're trying to build a house, right? And the house we're trying to build is a complicated house. And the only way to build it is we have to use all the tools in the toolkit to build it. So you can't build the house with just one tool. You can't. The wrench alone won't do it. And that's like the vote. The vote alone won't build the house, right? But you can't build the house without it.
Mm-hmm.
The protest alone won't build the house, but you can't build the house without it, right? Like that's actually how we think about this. And I think that if we help frame it like that for people, especially younger people, wouldn't feel like they are choosing between, they're choosing between a protest or voting, or they're choosing between being an activist or voting, or like you're not choosing between any of this stuff. I also sort of push people on this idea of like, what is it? A lesser two evils, right? Because the moment that you ask people, well, what's not evil? They, every time I've had this conversation with people, every single thing they say becomes evil in the end. So AOC is evil because she's a part of the two-party system. Then, one of the third-party candidates was evil because they didn't denounce this. Like that, everything actually becomes evil in the way that construction is set up. So that actually isn't a helpful. That's a defeatist construction. Like that is not a legitimate construction that I think of. When I think about it, it's like we are always choosing between imperfect things. That is like what choice is, right? Yeah. You're like, well, I sort of want to go to this college, but I want to go to this college. One might be better than, like, you're always making choices between two things that like are not equally amazing, right? And part of what we do is that we make choices today so that when we make choices tomorrow, they are better. That is like part of our work, right? Mm-hmm. And when I think about Trump and Biden, it's like one is literally trying to kill you, and one is not trying to save your life in the way you want him to. Two different things, right?
Yeah.
But we can push the guy who is not moving as quick as we want to. He will listen. He might be a little slower at listening. He's done it for a long time, but he's not trying to kill us. And he can totally be pushed to do the things we want. Then on the other side, he is literally trying to kill us. And you're like, well, I don't understand how you even participate in this idea that it doesn't matter. I think that in 2016, so many people were like, president doesn't matter. Just vote locally. Who cares about the president? And like, that was a mistake, right? Like, we are not the reason why Trump won. Our rhetoric, though, should match the reality of the organizing we do. Anybody who actually organizes in community knows that this is not a game. That's why I'm always interested when people call them organizers. And they think that this is sort of one big joke, because it's like, if you have had to talk to somebody who is incarcerated right now and might be subject to the death penalty because of Trump, or if you've been around somebody whose healthcare has been imperiled because of his cuts, right? Or if you are somebody who wants unemployment but can't get it, like none of this is sort of theoretical to you. This is like a real thing. So I always get worried about how people are so disconnected.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess to end off today's podcast, as you know, it's called the Sooner Voters Guide. Do you have any final advice for the young and soon voters like myself?
Hopefully, you'll be in office soon enough so that we won't be having to fight against all white men to get the things that we want. The second is that I think that we can win in this lifetime, that this is not a 400-year thing. It's not a 300-year fight. Like, we will win in this lifetime, and it'll be us believing. And the third is that, like, you just can't, me, this is a challenge that I offer to myself, is that, like, we can't be afraid to put a stake in the ground. We got to put a stake in the ground. And, like, just talking about what the big goal is without talking about how we get there is not enough.
That's great advice, and it really hits home with our current political climate right now, and how divisive we are. But folks at home, if you want to learn more about DeRay and his work, you can check out Pod Save the People and Campaign Zero, which will both be linked in the description. Thank you so much, DeRay, for spending time with me and sharing your valuable insight. It's been such a pleasure.
Cool. Talk to you later.
Thank you. And folks at home, make sure you tune in next time. For more exciting episodes of A Sooner Voters Guide, I'm Tengtrakool, signing off for today. Until next time, Sooner Voters.